Welcome everyone. My name's Chris Sparks. I work at Queen Mary University of London, as you can read from this slide, in the history department. Start that again. Hello. What we're doing today. What we're going to be doing today. So the first half of this session is going to be a kind of traditional we talk at you. It's going to be we're going to take it in turns, and then there'll be a short time for questions. And then the second part of the session is an interactive workshop where you get to build and make things using the exciting resources on your table. So you get to play and make things in small teams. And I think that's how it's going to work. So over to Mary to start our talk.
Great. Sorry. I'm just starting a timer so I don't go over. Welcome and thank you for being here. It's really a great pleasure to see so many people signed up for this, so that's really exciting for me. I'm Mary Chester-Kadwell. I'm a software developer at the University Library. I do coding, but also I do things like this. I also do things for the Cambridge Digital Humanities Lab, so things like advising academics on digital projects, and I do a bit of teaching as well. So kind of a bit of a mix and match. So let's talk a bit about the hackathon that we did last year in April. So this slide basically covers, in numerical terms, the number of people involved, the number of days, and the books, and the languages. We had 6 languages. It was so exciting. We had, and I'm going to enumerate them for you now, we had medieval Latin, Middle English, Modern English, Italian, Czech, and French. So it was very international. But this doesn't really give you a full flavour of what actually went on. This is what we did. So why did we do this? Why did we have a hackathon? Okay, it actually had quite a few different reasons. One of them was to explore special collections, and specifically glosses, which, if any of you like me, perhaps many of you are in special collections, but if you were like me and you didn't know at the beginning of the week what a gloss was, a gloss is basically a commentary or an annotation on a previous work, often typically the Bible, doesn't always have to be that way. Might have been deliberately part of the original manuscript, or it might have been added later by people. So glosses are really exciting. They have a lot of, they often span several centuries, so they have a lot of texture, and they're also laid out in really interesting ways. So they're kind of ripe for a digital exploration. The other thing that we wanted to do was teach and learn the participants, the students who came, the early career people who came, not by lecturing them about what digital is or lecturing them about what glosses is, but having them do something and learn as they go along. And it's really important in the modern profession to have digital skills in an early career, because so many of our jobs now involve that. And we also did a lot of collaboration, and we had a lot of fun. So how did we start the week? This was Monday afternoon. A room full of the most gorgeous things that the UL has to offer, laid out like a massive buffet of exciting manuscripts and a couple of early books. And we allowed the participants just to go around and enjoy looking at the books and deciding what was the most interesting for them. We also gave them an introduction to what we were doing and talked a little bit about how you create a web app. So I explained to them that what we wanted to do was build a prototype, not the finished product, but an idea that was explored, developed, tested, improved, and demonstrated and explained. The other thing about building an app is that you need to know who it is you're building it for. It's very important that you think about the user. For the participants we had from 4 different institutions, many of whom were post-grads or early careers, they often just thought about themselves as academics when they used digital resources, but we wanted them to try and step outside that and think about somebody else. So we provided them with 4 ready-made user personas who represent basically typical users. So we had Teresa, the lecturer, we had Leo, the traditional scholar who didn't really like computers, we had Conrad, the busy undergraduate who just wanted to write his essay, and Mariana, the leisure learner, who was my favourite, who was 72 and who really liked history but knew nothing about manuscripts. So, and it wasn't just about designing the app, it was also about 2 other important things, one of which is communication and documentation. So although we were all working in the same room together, we also set up a chat room so people could talk to each other online, in their groups, between us and the organisers, share information, both while we were together and at other times as well. We also tried to communicate what we were doing outward. So we tweeted about everything we did. We tried lots of photos, videos, etc., etc. We tried to really push out what we did, and that became itself part of the story of what we were doing. The other thing is, 5 days is a long time, and at the end of it, what do we come out with? Perhaps a prototype that partially works, but we've kind of lost what actually went on between the people and what they learned and what happened. So we spent a lot of time as organisers trying to document everything. We got the participants to fill in a little journey so that we had that at the end as well, because it's about the journey as much as the product. So here are 3 teams of fabulous, very excited people. And the way they chose to work in a team was by pitching ideas to one another until they coalesced around the same manuscript, the same persona. And so they kind of just agreed amongst themselves, which was kind of amazing, really. We tried to make sure that each group had a developer, because they were building a web app, which kind of worked. We had 2 developers in one group and a kind of developer in another group. And they were the group that needed more help. So the first thing we did was suggest to them that they do paper prototypes, because paper prototypes are a great way to communicate with your team about your ideas. So on the right we have a prototype that the team used to discuss how it was going to work, where the buttons were going to go, and how you would interact as a user. The great thing about paper prototypes is that you can throw them away. You can do it and you can throw them away. You can have an idea, you can try it out, you can check with your team, you can talk, you can throw it away and start again. It's a great tool. And then on the left we have a user journey where they are describing how a user goes through the app and goes from the different screens. But it wasn't all work, work, work. Creativity is the kind of thing, well, for me, my best ideas come when I'm sitting on the bus or going for a walk. So we also gave them some time off. We took them up the tower, found some fun books and things. And then on Thursday morning, only a couple of days after they started, really, we gave them a testing lab. We sat them down with some volunteers from a range of different disciplines and asked them to look and test the prototypes. And this was really kind of challenging for them, but also amazing, because they came out of it with things they could improve. So Thursday morning they tested, Thursday afternoon they incorporated those ideas into their prototypes. And then at the end of the week, if it wasn't enough to do all of this, they had to give a 15-minute talk to an assembled group of librarians and developers and archivists and other interested people, explain what they'd done, walk through the app, and reflect upon their experience. So they stepped outside of their comfort zones, basically, and they got a lot out of it. And Chris will talk about their feedback a bit later. But also, I stepped out of the side of my comfort zone. As an organiser, I wasn't just there to tell them what to do. I produced a film of the week for them as like a kind of Easter egg gift at the end. So now I'd like to show you. Over to Chris.
So, as as Mary said, kind of almost the point of the week wasn't what they produced. It was the journey that they went on doing that production and the ideas that they produced more than the products. But actually, the products that they made were fantastic. So we thought we'd like to share with you one of those. Oh no, that's just started a video again. One of those products. How do I go to the next slide? Please excuse me for a brief technical interlude. Here we go. Right, so I wanted to tell you about the prototype that was produced by, I think it was one of the most successful prototypes, and it's no surprise that it was produced by the group that I think gelled most and worked best together. We can talk a bit more about that later. So this team was called the Luke's because they were looking at a commentary on Luke's Gospel. They picked Mary's favourite user to develop for, Mariana the Leisure Learner, and they wrote this user story, which is a kind of a way into thinking about how their user wants to interact with the app. As a leisure learner, I want to learn about how to approach medieval manuscripts in an engaging and interactive way because I took an online course on the subject and I'm curious to learn more. So, as I say, this team had 2 developers on it and 2 medieval specialists, whose names I have forgotten. Marie, Luke, Matoj and David, who I feel like we should mention because they did all the work here. Their prototype it's a tool for Mariana to engage with one of the collections of the Cambridge University Library. The things about it that are fantastic, the group divided their time really well. They wrote some really beautiful text. You wouldn't necessarily believe from reading it that none of the people who wrote this were first language English, because the prose is better than mine by quite some way. It's fun, it's got personality, it doesn't fit on this screen. So it takes you on a guided tour through the manuscript, explains it step by step. You can read about it, explains a paragraph mark, which you may have seen before, and it engages the user, Mariana, by asking her to find more paragraph marks in the text, and when she does it, it says well done. I think what works great about this is it's creative, it's fun. The technology is actually not particularly sophisticated. It's not doing anything groundbreaking in terms of code, but it's really fun, it's well written, and it's engaging. And when they showed this to the group, when they presented this at the end of the week, it got really, really positive feedback. And one of the things that people asked was, what are you going to be doing with this? Are you going to be taking it further? So, I seem to have quit the slideshow. Yeah, maybe. Oh, yes. So, we collected feedback in 2 ways. We ran a kind of lessons learned session at the end of the time where we sat down together as a group and we talked through how the week had gone, how people felt about it, what went well, and we also had an online feedback form where people could perhaps feel a bit freer to say things that they didn't want to say in that face-to-face session. So a lot of the feedback was very positive. People enjoyed the team spirit. They were very, very keen on the fact that the week was very clearly structured and laid out, and it was clear what was going to be happening at every stage, which I have to say was thanks, as you may have experienced already in this talk, thanks far more to Mary than it was to me. They liked being led to think as a user of an app, which wasn't something, as Mary was saying, that they were particularly familiar with. And they felt a sense of satisfaction from having produced something. There was also less positive feedback, or constructive feedback. So one of the things that they wanted was more time. They wanted more time to get things done, more time to code their apps. They felt that a week wasn't enough time to kind of bring their brilliant ideas to fruition. Now, I think that's a success for us. If they went away thinking, I wanted to be able to spend more time doing this, then I take that as a win. Something that was perhaps less of a win was that we brought together there was myself and Mary, there were 2 other organisers, and we also brought in experts and other colleagues from the library. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got a couple of times was that our interventions as we went around the group were perhaps not well coordinated enough. So one of us would go and have an interesting conversation with the group, and then another of us would go and have an interesting conversation with the group, and the group would be sitting there thinking, why won't you go away and just let me get on with this? But that was a kink that we worked out as the week went on. Anyway, and there were also questions that we would need to think about to do with space. We had, it's always an issue when you're running this sort of event, but they wanted more space and space where they could be away from each other, and that was something that we weren't necessarily able to provide. So just before we finish, I just wanted to talk about what we as organisers took away from the session. So I think the key thing was, for us and for the participants, the process was more important than the product, and it was the experience that was the most important thing, and that we wanted them to focus on, and I think that they did ultimately focus on. As I said before, structure was very important. We wanted it to be a week in which people felt free and creative and were able to build things in the way that worked for them. So we wanted the teams to be able to organise themselves without too much imposition from us of who should be doing what and how their time should be exactly divided. But in order to do that, we needed to provide them with some creative constraints and a clear path to how they would produce their app. So there were waypoints throughout and I say a week, it was actually really, in terms of building the app, it was really 3.5 days, I think?
3 days.
3 days. So they arrived, we didn't convene until lunchtime on Monday, really, and they finished building their apps by Thursday afternoon. So it was really 3 days. But throughout that time, there were waypoints, so they presented to each other as a group. They did the testing lab. They presented their ideas to us. There were points at which they had to produce their documentation. So I think, whilst we didn't tell them exactly what to do, we gave them guidelines for how to progress. Thinking about design is actually harder than thinking about technology, which is, I think, something that we wanted to get people. Once you have the design and the idea, implementing that technologically is, might take time and might involve tricky problems, but really it's having the idea that is the important thing, and that is the thing that we wanted to engage people with. And documentation was very, very important for us. So we took loads of photos throughout the week. We got people to write about what they had done, what they felt their successes were. We were very keen to get them to do it whilst we had them there, because we were conscious that everyone who was taking part was either a student or had a job, and so their time once they'd left us would be quite reasonably dedicated to other things. We wanted for us and to have a kind of a record of what had happened, but also for the participants to have a record of what had happened, how they'd worked as a group, the things that the creative process that they'd gone through. And we'd like to think that it's a repeatable formula, not least because we're going to be running a similar session again next year. So if it's not repeatable, we'll be this year now. Yes, it's 2019, isn't it? How did that happen? So we hope that it's a repeatable formula that we, and indeed you, could adopt as well. So I think that's all we wanted to say in terms of talking about the event we ran. We've got a website where you can read, find out more about what we did, and there's links to some blog posts that we made about the event. So before we move on to the workshop session, does anyone have any questions?